Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Martina Gambacorta, and today we have the pleasure to be in front of the ambassador Giulio di Sant'Agata that I have the honor to present to you. So his career is very, very long, and we can divide it into the early career and a later career. So Giulio di Sant'Agata was born in Bergamo and is a career diplomat. He joined Italy's Foreign Service in 1973, and in 1975 he was posted as Secretary for Political Affairs at the Italian Embassy in Paris. He was appointed to the Italian Embassy in Canada as an economic counselor, and then he was Consul General in Vancouver during Expo 86, then assigned to the Economic Affairs department at the ministry, and later on to the Human Resources Department, to NATO in Brussels in 1990, and his first counselor for political affairs at the end of the Cold War, during the German reunification and the first Gulf War. So his later career started in 1993 when Terzi was assigned to the permanent mission of Italy to the United Nations in New York as first Chancellor for Political Affairs, and later as Minister and Deputy Permanent Representative. Then he was for a biennium elected member of the Security Council, where he led an active campaign to reform the UN Security Council, in which Councillor Terzi was especially involved, as he was on issues concerning human rights, fundamental freedoms, and sustainable development. Coherently, Terzi served as Deputy Secretary General of Italy's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Rome, Director General for Political Affairs and Human Rights, and Political Director. His responsibilities included major international security and political issues, especially in the framework of the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly, and the UN Council on Human Rights, as well as the Council of the European Union, NATO, the G8, and OSCE. He also advised the Italian Foreign Minister on international security, focusing on the Western Balkans, the Middle East, Afghanistan, East Africa, nuclear proliferation, tourism, and human rights. His later posting were first of all, as Italian ambassador to Israel during a period characterized by the outbreak of the Second Intifada, where he tried to improve relations between the EU and Israel during the Italian presidencies of the EU, and commitment in principle by Israel and the Palestinian Authority to the peace process on the basis of the roadmap. And then he served again as permanent representative to the United Nations in New York during the Italian mandate in the United Nations Security Council, and finally as ambassador to the United States until 2011. Ambassador Terzi worked on further strengthening bilateral cooperation and on international security, as well as on economic, cultural, and scientific matters. And finally, from November 2001 to March 2013, Ambassador Terzi worked as Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you very much, Martina. Thank you very much for this very friendly, generous, and really warm presentation. I feel a little bit embarrassed because it was a little bit encyclopedic, but there is an element in what you just described about my long journey in the ocean of international affairs. That just to pick that element of my personal story as a diplomat in those years between 2002 and 2003, years which are very difficult for the really big offensive by the Second Intifada against Israel, the terrorist offensive, who was already supported by the Iranian proxies in the area and in Israel especially, and that was an experience which was up to a certain extent positive for us as a country, as the Italian government, but for the European Union, because it was during those months that, and citing just an example, but which I find very significant in the present debate, almost 20 years after the moment that I'm mentioning. In 2003, thanks to the pressure that Prime Minister Berlusconi was making on his peers, 2 or 3 head of governments of other countries, the most important countries in Europe, the European Union decided to put Hamas on the list of terrorist organizations. And that, when you're saying what is the situation of Iran at present concerning this wide realm of international terrorism, how do they move? They use as I said, every possible tool to spread, to make use of terrorist activities directly through the IRGC or through their proxies, like Hezbollah, Hamas, as I said, Islamic Jihad, and through the connection also with the Taliban. There is a vast and very frightening reality in the AfPak region, what was called the AfPak region, and we should call it again now, with the Taliban in Kabul again setting up a new regime. We should, I think, as the analysts and the geopolitical observers and those who are engaged in fighting against terrorism and drawing the strategies about this huge fight and this war against terrorism, we should consider that region, the AfPak, especially the federal administered area, the northwest area, so in Pakistan and Afghanistan, they are the same reality in this very worrisome network of local, but mind you, global terrorism. So to come back very quickly to Iran as well as Pakistan, don't be misguided thinking that the culprit in that geopolitical situation of the resurgence of the Taliban or the inner strength of the Taliban movement, don't be misled by thinking that Pakistan is the only responsible country, or at least part of the Pakistani system, the Pakistani state. Certainly part of the Pakistani intelligence. Because Iran, as well as Pakistan, has long provided shelter to Taliban leaders, and that has provided weapons and cash, flows, cash. The Iranian population is desperately poor, is in need of economic support. They cannot fight the pandemics, or they cannot send the kids to proper education, at least the very poor, which is a large share of the population. But they are all the money they need to support terrorists. And they've been supporting, over the last 15, 16 years, the Taliban in Afghanistan, among the organizations in Middle East and in Gaza that I've already mentioned. The Taliban leaders have been traveling back and forth to Iran since 1996. Since the moment when the Taliban first captured Kabul, and beginning later, piling up on that experience, those relations and that cooperation, beginning in 2006, the IRGC Quds Force began training the Taliban in Afghanistan on small unit tactics, on small arms, explosive, IED, improvised explosive devices. There are people who are convinced, who worked in the province of Herat, that a number of casualties among Italian security people, Italian personnel, were due to IED planted by the Taliban, but construed and built in Iran, neighboring Iran. That is the story. And now that has been always kept under the carpet, because nothing can be said at an official level in Italy or in Europe denouncing things, atrocious things, which have been done by the Iranian regime against our citizens, European citizens, even Italian military. But that is something for which there is strong evidence, and there are all the reasons to believe that this is true. It's not something which circulates easily on the social media and so on, but this is the reality of the support that the Taliban gave, that the Taliban were given by the Iranians, and they provided these very murderous bombs, but also ammunition, rocket-propelled grenades, mortar rounds, 107 millimeter rockets, and plastic explosive. And Iran has also permitted the Taliban free movement of foreign fighters through Iranian territory to support the insurgency against the Western coalition and against the Afghan army. Little surprise that in 2014, the United States Treasury added 3 Iranian IRGC Force operatives and 1 associate to its list of global terrorists for their efforts to plan and execute attacks in Afghanistan, including providing logistical support in order to advance Iran's interest in the region. And I'm mentioning this because to connect with my experience that you kindly mentioned, 2003, 2004, especially to the Italian semester of for the presidency of the European Union in 2003, that was also the moment where the hidden military nuclear program carried on by Iran was discovered. And was discovered, we know, thanks to the contribution of evidences and witnesses provided by the MEC PMOI, the strongest group of Iranian resistance abroad, and that is why the Iranian regime is hitting as much as it can this group individually and collectively. Let me remember that an Iranian terrorist diplomat on post in Vienna 3 years ago tried to blow up the entire gathering of almost 100,000 people very close to Roissy in Villepinte, the annual gathering of the National Council of Resistance Iran. This Assadollah Assadi, an Iranian diplomat, traveled from Vienna through Germany to Belgium in direction of Villepinte with a bomb, very, very strong and devastating bomb if it had exploded, in the tank, in the trunk of his car, and met with some accomplices in Belgium, was intercepted thanks to the very efficient activity of some intelligence group, and was arrested with the material documents, information. This guy was somehow the coordinator and the European coordinator of various the terrorist group covered by diplomatic immunity, and was, thanks God, detected just in time, arrested just in time, just a few hours, I wouldn't say minutes, but certainly not more than 2-3 hours before he planted this terrible explosive. And he was given by the Antwerp court in Belgium 20 years, the maximum penalty foreseen by the Belgian judiciary, and it was sentenced. The Iranian regime was so embarrassed that they didn't have the possibility of relaunching with an appeal and to try to clear his case with an appeal, because they became aware in Tehran of the fact that if they had appealed, other evidences, even more embarrassing for the regime, surely could have come out. So I'm mentioning this because that shows that that is really a smoking gun. That shows that the highest hierarchy of the Iranian regime are not only aware, but they are directing the Iranian diplomat terrorists working in Europe against Europeans, threatening and trying to kill Europeans or foreign refugees from Iran received and in Europe and guaranteed by a political refugee status, which is very relevant for the international community. It is recognized legally by the international community. So these are people which cannot be touched, but the Iranians don't care less. They use terrorists to get rid also of these people.
You directed the debate very well. I mean, so this is the situation of Iran, and Iran is carrying out a terroristic action, not only through proxy wars, but actually also towards Europe and the international community more broadly. So my question is, what is the reaction? What is the international community doing in order to contrast, to counter Iranian action? And I'm referring also to sanctions, because I've heard many times people, experts, saying that sanctions are working, actually. So I'm wondering whether this is true and how are they working? Just a last question, but what has not been done, in your opinion? What the international community should do in order to be more effective while countering the Iranian action?
This is a first element, that lack of information, lack of knowledge that the European government should give to their public opinion, and in order to be supported when they act accordingly, banning Hezbollah, Hamas, IRGC, and so on, and preventing that flows of money, business, cooperation, even military cooperation, intelligence cooperation between European countries and Iran, and Iranian terrorist diplomats acting in Iran. All these aspects should be matter of a completely different foreign policy and security policy by the European Union. There is a need to come up forcefully in underlining that the actions of the Iranian regime are totally against peace and security, it must be said. And even more so, to send the decision of External Action Service, of the European External Action Service, to send a high-level representative to the inauguration of a criminal, genocidal criminal, Ebrahim Raisi, the new president of Iran. So, and a very similar question concerns the nuclear agreement. I mean, the nuclear agreement, we're talking about the effectiveness of sanctions. When the sanctions were in place, were implemented, the oil and gas sanctions, they worked. They worked, and the regime was under pressure. The only way why the negotiations were started in the year during the Obama presidency, where the Bush presidency had put in place a set mechanism and a set of sanctions, and Italy was among the front runners at that time. But with the Obama presidency, when the negotiation started, there were the first openings, and the Europeans, especially the German, French, the Brits at the time, they were ceding ground. And although we were ceding ground, they, in order to have, there was a sort to the Iranians, it appeared quite clear that there was sort of desperation from the European and the American camp. Let's not talk about the position of the Russian and the Chinese, because really they cannot care less about nuclear proliferation. I mean, the important for them is to let proliferate the countries that they consider friends. You see, the PKR has a nuclear arsenal, very dangerous and increasing. And the Chinese have contributed to the development of that arsenal, directly and indirectly, because the survival of the regime is in the hands of Beijing. That is historically, but is also a question of the sanctions which are really strangling the North Korean regime are violated on the border. There are thousands of trains, lorries, and so on, which go back and forth to supply of everything Kim Jong-un and this regime. So why one could say, but how is it the China, which is becoming bigger and bigger nuclear power, they allow a neighbor on which wisdom there can be many doubts to get a nuclear arsenal, because the Beijing is convinced, has been convinced for a long time, that that neighbor is taken very firmly in his hands by a leash, and they can oblige him to do something or prevent him to do something. This is the history of the last 20 years. And they are considered they can do the same with Iran and perhaps with other countries. So this is why I say China, but that applies also to Moscow. Beijing and Moscow, they don't care less about nuclear proliferation and preventing seriously Iran. That goes for the position of Russia and China in the JCPO. Now the story is that the Atomic International Agency, Energy Agency, was extremely concerned. The Director General Grossi was very much concerned over the last few months for the continuous enrichment, 60% of uranium grade, very close to the weaponization of uranium, but also with the conversion of the fuel into metal, which is a determinant step to provide a nuclear weapon capable to be carried by ICBM or Iranian missile. In all this, there is also sanctions have been working, but unfortunately, since China and Iran, they have been working and they are an important tool, but they must be implemented and respected. But nowadays, a major disruptor of the international order, a major disruptor of international law, that is to say China, is importing a huge amount of Iranian oil. In July, more than 40% of the Iranian production was shipped to China. And so sanctions now are not working, but because there is a country which is a permanent member of Security Council, which is not taking its responsibilities.
Of course. So, I mean, fabulous speech, really, really interesting. And I really thank you for having shared your experience here. And I hope you enjoyed too.
I enjoyed very much and enjoyed your questions. And I spoke too much, as usual, for diplomat, but the category needs to be to be given the word when it's possible.
Of course, it's worth it, of course. So really thanks, and see you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Martina. All the best.